Hello and welcome back. As if you have never been away. So I have to do the first thing, which is remember to put on my glasses, because without them, I can't read anything. So has it been a good afternoon? Phew, that's a relief. It's quite bad when you ask that question and people go, no, it's terrible. And luckily online, they can't answer me. So today is all about connections. Don't do that. It's all about who we are connected to and how. It's all about what we're not connected to. It's all about what different kinds of connections can make possible. So I am very delighted to be joined here by Suzanne Walsh, and I'm going to read this because my memory at this stage... Suzanne Walsh. Sorry. At this stage in the proceedings, obviously, my mind starts to wander. It's gotten a bit full. So, cross-disciplinary artist and writer from Wexford. They primarily use performative lectures. It's a great place for performative lectures. Vocal explorations, audio musical performances, and text-based work to query ideas around human, non-human relationships. I think you can see connections already building from today, and consensus reality, often drawing on the scientific world as well as more esoteric sources. And we've heard that repeatedly over today. Where do we find the data that we need and that we value? I'm also joined by Alan James Byrne. Hello. Yeah. Shouldn't we have a yeah? Thank you. They are out there somewhere. Alan James is a neurodivergent and environmental artist, curator and festival maker. Festival maker is quite important. I'll come back to that in a minute. Producing interactive, socially engaged and site-specific project. The focus of their practice are disability, climate change and the human mind. Alan James Byrne works highly collaboratively, really highly collaboratively, with other visual artists, writers, musicians, filmmakers and scientists through their projects. So the way that we're going to do this is people will take a chance to introduce you to some of their work, and then I have some guiding questions, and we'll see where we go to. Is that okay? Fabulous.
I'm Alan, James Burns, Alan for short. I'm going to talk about some of my practice for 5 minutes, and then Suzanne will talk about their practice for a couple of minutes, and questions just like Dominic said. Oh, thank you. That's good. Do I do anything here? Nope.
Yeah.
Oh, there we go. So I'm a visual artist, producer, curator. One of my projects, so I'm going to talk about three strands within my practice. And this is a body of work called Augmented Body Altered Mind. It uses brain-computer interfaces for audiences to engage with an audio-visual environment that explores the top intersection of neurodiversity and climate change. Audiences put on a headset, and that kind of changes, manipulates visuals and the audio that kind of corresponds with those visuals. I work with a writer, Chandrika Narayama Mohan, and to develop a script around neurodiversity and climate change. And this kind of came about from a number of things. One, my own neurodiversity, my own kind of hyper-focused interests of the climate emergency, but also I was exploring a lot with brain-computer interfaces and what I can do and what kind of narrative I can bring using that technology within my art practice. That kind of technology really engages audiences, and then once you engage audiences, you open up to talk about climate, the brain, and then you can bring that. Once you open them up to being able to talk about the brain, you can bring that anywhere. The neurodiversity, obviously, as we've all been learning this morning, has lots of strengths and abilities. One is that we think creatively. We kind of we can kind of find where we can support finding solutions to problems such as climate change. I'm kind of fascinated by climate action and the lack of neurodivergence within climate action rooms. So this is an artwork that I've been developing around that theme and topic. It's touring Ireland at the minute, but it's also been developed into a community engaged practice where I'm engaging 5 neurodivergent communities across Ireland to create 5 neurodivergent communities and climate action stakeholders to create artworks together to creatively come up with, through this method, to also think about local climate action problems that they can creatively think through together. I don't know if I explained that properly, but we're moving on. This next part of my practice is audio artworks that I create, where I usually install audio systems inside caves or on castles. And I work with writers, Sue Rainsford and Shintrikanari Yamamohan again. We develop streams of consciousness in the form of, we personify these structures in the cave or the castle or other entities, and look at how that climate degradation is impacting upon them as a way of, so my cave practice entirely hollow aside from the dark. We install audio systems inside caves, bring audiences into the cave, and listening to an audio piece in the form of Earth going through a mental health breakdown because of the environmental impact on its body. So we explore mental health, well-being, climate degradation all together in an immersive environment. The castle kind of has a similar perspective. As a neurodivergent person, I kind of really engage a lot through experience and engagement outdoor kind of environments. So this kind of gravitating to these types of experiences is what really kind of is where it came from for me. Processing. This is a still from an artwork by Ruth Laguerre, and the reason why it's up here is because tomorrow I have an exhibition opening in Project Art Centre as part of a festival, which we'll talk about in a little bit. This is an exhibition that I've curated. It's my first curated big show. Actually, it has Suzanne Walsh in it, which we'll talk about in a bit. But it's called Distinct. It's an exhibition of 11 artists who identify with lived experience of disability and how their work on climate change. So I'm interested in curatorially looking at how the lived experience of disability can support climate action, and how climate change affects people with lived experience of disability. So obviously, the climate emergency affects different communities differently. And especially the disability community, often not considered in climate action policies. In extreme weather events, evacuation policies don't consider us in terms of physical disabilities, but also in neurodivergent community disabilities. Climate action, also things like eco-ableism, where moves towards more sustainable ways of living, like getting rid of plastic straws, forgets that a lot of people with disabilities need plastic straws to be able to live on a daily basis independently. But also increased heat in the summer affects our medications. There's a whole different ways of how the climate change affects people with lived experience of disability. But also, disability community has ways to support climate action. We're resourceful. We know how to navigate a world of barriers. We are creative thinkers. We have a plethora of skill sets that are not utilized within climate action. So the exhibition brings together 11 artists and their perspectives and works on climate action in order to sort of ignite that conversation. It's already ignited by other people, but to support that conversation. Opening tomorrow night at Project Art Centre, when we are doing collaboration with Creative Brain, we'll come back to in a bit. And these are all welcome to it. Now, thank you very much.
Okay. That's come up okay. I'm Suzanne Walsh. the introduction said, I do a lot of work with performance. I'm also a writer. Thinking about collaboration in general, as well as making my own works, I work a lot with other people because I'm a performer, because I do a lot of work with voice. I actually sang a John Cage piece for a metal band there recently. I've been in other people's films, like Vivian Dick films, for example. I do a lot of writing for people. So yeah, in a lot of ways, yeah, I'm an artist for hire sometimes, as well as my own practice. Just going to talk about this work first, Bird Become Bird, which is actually the first performance-only work that was bought by the Arts Council collection. So it was the first time, as in it doesn't have any material. They've made a film now, but it exists. Like we had to do a whole negotiation of how do you buy something that doesn't actually physically exist. So that was quite interesting. So here I'm performing it was almost 2 years ago, an exhibition in Castlebar for the 80th anniversary of the Arts Council collection. And what was interesting with this show was Seamus Nolan, the curator, was working with local community groups who selected works from the Arts Council collection to be in the show. So actually a bird watching group selected my work because this work is where I sing like birds. I'm using a looping device and I'm doing a progression from singing kind of chorally, and eventually it becomes something that's more discordant, and eventually I'm building layers of what sounds like lots of birds. And it creates people say it creates a kind of a strange dissonance that, is that my voice? I'm kind of interested in the idea of the body and voice existing outside the body and inside the body. To explain a little bit more about my own situation, I've diagnosed of schizoaffective disorder, and usually I'm told to stay away from voices. But anyway, I like to indulge myself a little bit. This kind of the whole schizophrenic kind of, I guess, family you could call it. There's still a lot of stigma around it. It hasn't really had that same sort of discussion or kind of welcome in that other neurodiversities have. We're still out there. It's a lot of stigma, misunderstanding. But I think we're more being welcomed under the neurodiversity umbrella now, which I think is really, really helpful. So for me, of course, you have to be careful with your health. But I feel like, in my works, I do, like you say, indulge myself, but my own worldview sometimes about how I experience things with my body. So very interesting, this synesthesia talk, actually, because I'm like, oh yeah, I've had those experiences. But yeah, go back to this work. I'm here performing two swifts, swift boxes in a park in Castlebar. So I'm not only performing for people, I'm performing for birds. And I'm also performing birds. The work was originally inspired by, I'm not a theorist at all, but readings of Deleuze on the composer Oliver Messiaen, and he's talking about birds and imitation. So I'm allowing kind of my idea of birds to enter my body, and then I'm putting them back out again. So these are kind of ideas about how I experience the world that I'm putting into performances. I just decided to include this because it just shows also my collaborative practice. This is both a show that was happening in a space called Unit 44, which is in Stony Batter. It's run by Kirkos Ensemble. They're an experimental quartet who also commission a lot of works. I perform a lot in the visual art world, all the way over to experimental music world, and I also would do a lot in the literary world as well, so I'm kind of cross-disciplinary. But here I was actually curating this show called Vox Magicae, where I invited people who were working a lot with voice and text. So that was a really interesting show, bringing people from different backgrounds. But this work itself that I'm performing here with a musician that I work with a lot, Diarmuid McDiarmuid, I'm also performing a work that I actually made with ghosts. I was commissioned to make this work again. Like I said, it's kind of a funny thing for when you're somebody who's got a schizo condition to be indulging yourself with the idea of communicating with other beings. But I was commissioned to make this work by Paper Visual Art Journal, which is an artist journal, and they have a current issue about ghosts. And so I made a work through automatic writing, which I don't know if you know, but it's an older technique kind of around the turn of the century when everyone was into table turning and this kind of thing, where you allow your hand to be moved by something else. Now, of course, it can be coming from your own mind. It could be your own unconscious. I did it in a house that is in a known haunted house in Wexford. And then I also been making performative versions of the sounds I recorded in the house and with the text, and then that text is also published. So I often work that way, like recordings, performance, publication. And this is just another technique I use in my work. This is an older work from a show called A Different Republic in 2016, which was around the same time it was part of the 1916 commemorations. But it's a technique I use in a lot of my work, where I use composite text from many sources. So in this case, I was working around the idea of Thomas MacDonagh, the revolutionary. So I was taking text from his poetry and his friend Francis Ledwidge, who had written Lament for Thomas MacDonagh, the poem. And also I was taking text from online activist groups. At that time, it was more Facebook. And then I was not using any of my own language. I just used all those to make new texts, which were sort of cryptic texts. This is actually a video making comment on the Irish state today. And there's also a sound of this bird called the bitterin, which is referenced in Lament to Thomas MacDonagh. As a sort of idea, it's an extinct bird in Ireland now, as a sort of missing voice now. So I've used this technique many times, which I also feel kind of works with how my mind works in a sort of fragmentary way. I've made poetry from reviews on Amazon for nature music compositions. I've rearranged David Attenborough, transcripts of David Attenborough videos, for example. So I've used that technique many times. So that's just a little brief introduction to how I work. Okay, I'll leave that.
Thank you both for an introduction to your work. And as both people were saying, the Disrupt starts tomorrow night?
Yes. So
It'll come.
Hello.
It'll come. Keep going.
Hello.
Yeah.
So the festival that we're launching tomorrow night is called Disrupt Disability Arts Festival. It's a new festival. It's launched that we hope become an annual arts festival in the city. That belongs, and it's disability led and disability focused, and we hope that it will belong to the disability community, and we can hand it over in a number of years as we build a structure. So it's kind of really great to be able to be supported by other festivals in the city, and just like with Creative Brain Week, it kind of aligns quite well, and there's a lot of really good teams. So thank you, Dominic, for all your support.
Thank you both. And also thank you for doing this the night before your festival, which I could never do. I'm too twitchy. But it also, I think, and so the reason for mentioning this is that we will be talking about work and where work comes from. But, work is to be experienced. So it's an opportunity for people over the next few days to go and see the work, which talks for itself in a way. And so I have a series of questions. I'm going to go through it, but you might interrupt the questions and join in with each other as you wish.
Should we talk about the work I'm doing tomorrow?
Yeah, Oh, good. So to start with, this idea about collaboration. So one of the things that's striking is that collaboration seems to manifest in both of your practices in very dynamic ways, with people, with the environment, with yourselves. And it feels to be important to your creative processes. So I'm interested in how you understand your neurodivergence plays a role in this. And over to you.
Yeah, am I on as well?
Yeah, if you keep going.
Yeah, I suppose like I was talking about, I briefly mentioned, that I think that the way my mind works does inform a lot about how I make work. Like I was very resistant, and I'm being very stealthy a lot of the time about being open about that. Like because I said there is still a lot of stigma, and I've experienced it, and people think, oh, anything you might. I've had situations where I'm working with someone and they think anytime I've got a problem, it's all in my head or something. So I'm going to be careful, but also I'm always careful that the work's not just flattened to that context only.
Yeah.
Because I think we're made of different things. I think we're all, we all have lots of different parts of ourselves. It's not just the only one. So, I think that's important as well. But I would say it's more something that, it's behind the work, perhaps, in a way. Like I said, the way it was somebody else who pointed out to me actually the way that there's often like these multiplicities going on, for example, the voices, or that I'm often channeling something else. Something's coming through me. I'm collecting multiple voices, like whether it's comments on YouTube or, that it's like, even the work tomorrow, it's kind of a list of a lot of animals. And we'll talk about that in a moment. But so I find myself being some kind of channel of many things. And I suppose with my called mental health situation, there's a sort of a porousness that can happen with schizotype conditions. We're talking about the synesthesia, like I've had to be dragged out of galleries by friends if I feel like the work is getting inside me, my body, I think it's... And another thing I think is that when you're neurodivergent, there's a lot of work you have to do to exist in the world as it's structured. Like, there's a kind of a performativity, and there's also, a lot of us have other health issues because of the sort of strain of being in the world. So I feel like when I'm performing particularly, it's like, this is my world now. Now you have to enter into, now you have to do the work, or like, now I'm going to, it's like a little pushback,
I feel like, so in terms of like, for me, in terms of how my neurodivergence kind of creates sorry, I just have to prop my words. I have dyslexia, ADHD, autism, so my words don't come to my brain. Did it get smashed? I think because my ADHD is why I kind of work collaboratively. I think that is, and once I started harnessing that within my creative practice, I started doing kind of the things I wanted to do. I started being more kind of achieving the types of work I wanted. And I didn't know, so I was kind of more of an artist in a studio doing, kind of sitting on my desk, kind of more cellular or insular, which wasn't going anywhere. But once I started harnessing my neurodivergence, this is how I started collaborating with loads of people. And that's my skill set. I'm able to bring people together. And that's kind of so my practice is basically allowing me to just, my artistic practice has become something that allows me to exercise how my brain works, and I've had to create it over many years. The artwork, augmented body, altered mind, the brain-computer interface, neurodiversity, climate change. It's kind of built on. It's supported by a theory of evolution called complementary cognition, which is spearheaded by Dr. Helen Taylor from Strathclyde University in the UK, which is their kind of theory is that evolution purposefully creates a community whose brains purposefully think differently to each other. Because if you have people who think differently, you have a better chance of coming up with a solution and a creative solution together when you work together. So each as a collective, our cognitions complement each other. And kind of that's in terms of like collaboration and neurodiversity, it's for me that speaks loads.
Beautiful theory. What's her name again?
Dr. Helen Taylor.
I will be putting that in my phone later after I know. So environment, climate emergency, our relationship to nature. It's key aspects in both of your work. I'm interested if you think neurodivergence plays a role in why the environment is a key aspect of your work. And I don't know whoever wants to take it first.
Sure. Going to alternate one.
Yeah, like
Okay.
Okay. For me, I think growing up, there's a sort of a way that I suppose that I am with the schizotype things where you can feel quite separate from people. And in fact, for a long time, I think I felt not very human, or I felt like I had to learn how to be a human. And that's how I got into acting, actually, and that's how I got into performance. That's how I learned how to be a human. Anyway, it was ongoing. I always felt very, I think because of this separation feeling from other people that I had, which is, I think, quite a common part of being schizophrenic conditions. I felt very close to the animal world, to nature. I grew up in a very rural place with a big river estuary, which I guess almost became like what I think now is a form of animism, I just really felt like I was very attached to these different environmental, like the river itself I'm very close to. It feels like an animal to me, or a person or something. And very close to animals. And in my own life, I've worked a lot with animals. I've also worked in, say, wildlife rescue. So I've also, I do that as a volunteer. So I've lived with a lot of birds, for example. So I've always had this connection to that world. It like filled in a gap for me that I maybe felt that I wasn't cared for with humans. I felt like I could be myself in that world. So there's a natural connection for me there. And then I think also politically, I think, there's a sort of marginalization of people with disabilities and people who aren't seen to have value. I mean, there's so much of our world is kind of connected about economics and, how valuable people can be. And I think I always felt there's a connection between, say, people with disabilities or even artists and wildlife, for example, that feel like they're disposable because they don't have this particular economic value or questionable economic value. So I feel that that's also maybe something that I think about a lot. And and in a lot of my works, I think about categorization and how how there's a value system embedded into that.
The WHO group, they've been thinking and talking a lot about how medical health has traditionally been framed on this idea of pathogenesis. What's the genesis? What's the origin of the pathology? Yeah. And whereas artists quite often they look for salutogenesis. Where's the origin of health?
That's really interesting because I actually did a lot of reading into Chinese medicine and philosophy years ago because I've done a lot of my own research. Yeah. And like they say that, in Western medicine, it's always about looking for this one source, which is actually related a lot to our religion of the one God. Yeah. And that in Chinese medicine and is related to Taoism. So it has this more kind of, in Chinese medicine diagnosis, they look at the whole picture. They look at everything together. So it has a sort of holistic model, which is really interesting.
And then you build your own world from that synthesis, as you talked about. True. Alan, Jane.
I guess actually so part of why climate, like building my own world is also like when you grow up, obviously, with a lived experience disability, you have to build your own world. No one's building it for you. So just to kind of add on to that. But I guess for me, I guess I have hyper focused, and I get really focused on particular things. I have special interests. So my entire life, I've always been focused on the climate. I've always environmental degradation. It just hasn't gone away from me. It's been there my entire life, and I guess that's like my neurodivergent. That is an aspect of neurodivergence, which is obviously Greta Thunberg is the one of the big examples. That's a very valuable thing within society and can be used, not used, but having special interest and hyperfocus but it also allows me to see nuances. So I'm really good at seeing nuances within the climate action, like what voices are not being heard, what ways are we not talking about it, how can we engage people, what streams of technology can I string together to create nuanced conversations around it. I think that's all the way my brain works. I'm starting to understand that's how I can support climate action and through that. And I was just and then I can bring people together. So my dyslexic brain allows me to I can't write or draw I can't read or write well, but I can see connections that tend to be not obvious to a lot of people. So allow me to bring together people to create stuff. Yeah.
So there's so many things pop into my head when you talk. There are the dance schools quite often recognise that they have 90% or thereabout of the people that go to dance schools are dyslexic in one way or another, and dance becomes a way that they explore and embody the world. And the other one is I've come across people who are radically dyslexic, I guess it might be the phrase. But what they do is they run large institutional systems. And what they're able to do is spot how these systems join together in a way that very few other people can. Which sort of brings us to the next bit. It brings us to society. We're moving in an interesting way. So society moves towards a more sustainable way of living. we're noticing more and more examples of how the disability and neurodivergent communities are excluded from climate action. Yeah. How have you noticed this in your own lives and practice? And how might we be more inclusive as we try to create a just future?
This is kind of I do a lot of this. My practice is a lot about this. We are moving towards a more sustainable way. We're trying to, a lot of us, hopefully. But like I was saying earlier, a lot of those actions do exclude a lot of people with disabilities, lived experience disability. For like a lot of climate action policies are not in large print or not in language that can be understood by neurodivergent communities. They're evacuation policy. So if you're autism and you don't want to physically be touched, or you have you have a sensory overload, and then you're being shoved onto a boat or per se, then those nuances that creates panic, that creates and a fallback then against slowing down an evacuation. These nuances are not picked up in most climate action policies. And this is for some examples of how neurodivergent communities being excluded. A lot in most climate action projects, there's not access funding. So for people with lived experience of disability to take part in climate action, you actually have to spend more. So I can't read policies without having it being read to me, and I need to pay people to do that. I can't write responses without having people to support me to do that. So if I want to take part in a climate action policy, I need access support. And a lot of climate action policies or climate action projects don't have access funding. There's a lot of, if you go to most exhibitions or most conferences or different things around climate change, the information's not accessible. So you're excluding neurodivergent communities plus the wider disability community. How can we become, there was a two parts to that, wasn't there? How can we become more inclusive?
Yeah.
Understanding it, engaging communities, nothing about us without us, across all communities. Including including the wider disability community within climate action is how we go about it. Come to my exhibition tomorrow to learn more. Or our exhibition, sorry, collaboration. Yeah. Have you noticed anything yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have the same kind of issues around reading and writing. In fact, yeah, that's a world I'm very happy in. I just think I think there's a lot of issues that cross over with other parts of society, like for example, the poorer people, working class, that type of thing. Things. I'm just thinking things like putting solar panels on your house. I mean, there's just a sort of presumption that everyone lives a particular kind of life that has the resources. That everyone's in a nuclear family. These are things that always really bother me, And I think there's a lot of discussion this week around the referendum, which I'm not going to get into, about what is a family, like who is represented as this sort of default in society. And a lot of disabled people fall outside that, and a lot of other people fall outside that. And that's something that I'm just, so for me, it's not just even people with disability, but yeah, it's just people on lower income. There's a lot of stress of like, am I going to be taxed? Am I not going to be able to get this thing? Am I not going to, I won't be able to access this grant. I think there's crossovers sometimes.
Yeah.
With intersections, yeah, for sure, with different kinds of people.
Like we all know that minorities are, the intersectionality of minorities usually means that if you are someone with lived experience of disability, queer, person of color, etc., you are also more likely to be have socioeconomic needs, or that's not the right word,
Or be
impacted by socioeconomic things.
Yeah.
So it's also understanding those nuances, and also when we're creating work around climate change or climate emergency, disability is one of the minority, or one of the disability is everywhere. Every community has disability. We all become, if we live long enough, we all grow. If we live long enough, most of us will become disabled or have a disability as well. It's just kind of
As you said, we're not any one thing.
Yes, absolutely.
All the time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which kind of brings us quite neatly to festivals, because festivals are little mini worlds. Last time we sat on a stage like this, we talked about festivals, or we were asked about festivals. And I was asked, why did I make festivals, which is what I made before I made things like Creative Brain Week. And I said, it's because they're little mini utopias. You make the world how you want them to be, and people can step into them for a little bit of time. And then they go away with that sensation of being visible, of being included, of being in charge, of being whatever. And I think that has a huge impact on the world that people then go into. I think it's a transformative process. So let's talk a bit about Disrupt. I think we're here. You're doing a performance tomorrow. How did it come about? Tell us about it. Tell us about the thing.
Yeah, it's a performance called Lazarus Lingua. I actually made it a few years ago, but sometimes things start small and then they go to different iterations, or I remake them in different situations. And actually, this is really amazing in Disrupt because it's really ramped it up into something that was, for a very small gallery performance, and then it was part of a podcast for another festival during lockdown when nobody could perform. And now it's becoming something very, very theatrical. It's been amazing actually to work on the festival with. I've had a lot of collaboration. I've been working with a costume designer, Amy Egan, working with Jack Colley on sound. So it's going to be very, very, it's a very theatrical, amazing costume, really amazing sound design. So it's a performance that is a list of extinct animals going back around 4,000 to 7,000 BC to present day in Latin. I'm using the pronunciation of Latin approximation, or I could say inspired by the approximation of what they think Latin was like as a living language. So it's also kind of like, it's also like, the names of the animals are extinct, the language is extinct as a living language. And so I go back to present day. So that sounds kind of quite simple. There's also kind of an audio intro, which is more improvisational as well. I've also, in this performance, it's changed because we have to be aware, and this is what's really interesting working with Disrupt, of other disabilities. So we're trying to also make the work be very visual in a way that maybe, I like sometimes that language does its thing on its own, or sound does its thing on its own, but I've incorporated a lot of gestures for the animals to kind of help the deaf community, for example, understand the work. Also, there's working with very low vibrational sounds in my voice and in the sound design so that you can feel the work. But the work it's inspired by the idea that Latin has these multiple uses. It's used in the scientific community. It's also used in the church, esoteric, ritualistic language. So in a way, I'm using something that's scientific, but I'm performing it in a more ritualistic way. So it's sort of invocation of the dead. So I'm kind of always interested in that kind of play in between those worlds, like I said. So in a way to describe it, it's sort of very hard to describe it, really, isn't it?
I think that does it really well.
Yeah.
And I also on topic is like that, because there's a lot of channeling within that.
Yeah.
And then
and I'm using my voice in a very particular way to make, sometimes the words become like calls, for example, or I'm actually, should I tell you what I'm saying, ending with? I don't want to give it away. It's going to be online.
Yes.
Yeah. Should I say that? I don't know. Yeah? No?
No.
Yeah, so I'm actually going to end up with this bird that was just extinct in I won't give away the name. You can look up some of it. But it's basically, I'm ending with a bird that is designated extinct this year in Hawaii, little songbird. And so I've learned to sing its song. So I will end with singing. It's taken me a while to learn how to sing it. The song of this bird that has just become extinct. So that will be the end of the performance.
You continue the voice of the bird.
I do. Yeah. Yes, I've learned it, and I will carry that till I die.
Fantastic.
Which is beautiful when you kind of consider when you were saying earlier that you connect a lot with nature, and that, and that's with your lived experience of disability and that connection.
You remember when we were both living at Fire Station, what I was up to with birds.
Yeah.
So we both were living in the same residency in Fire Station Studios, and I was doing a lot of bird rescue at the time. So I was smuggling in seagulls and things. I work with an organization, but anyway.
The sudden disappearance of Seagull from the Five Lamps.
No, they were injured. I was rescuing them.
Thank you for doing that. I worked a long time ago with 4 Australian men that lived in a shop window for 2 weeks completely, 24 hours a day. And on the last day, this was in central London, so there were by bus stops and busy people and all sorts of things. And on the very last day, they did an interview from the window where they had been living for 2 weeks. And somebody said, can you tell me, please, why do you make the work? And the guy said, look, I've been living in a shop window. If I could tell you in a sentence, I wouldn't bother doing this. So
it's so true. Yeah. I think every artist returns to similar things because it's like you're trying to work something out.
Yeah. Chipping away, you're doing that thing.
So yes, just to kind of, tomorrow is the launch of Disrupt, Disability Arts Festival. We have a performance on Friday by Christopher Bailey.
So I'll do that bit.
Oh,
so,
right,
because
okay,
they don't know necessarily. Yeah. So we had the Jameel Arts and Health Lab. We had the people talking about the Lancet piece, the session before last. And part of the Jameel, the missing leg of the stool, I guess, is Christopher Bailey. Christopher Bailey is the WHO Arts and Health lead and kind of started that program a few years ago, was here last year. This year he's come back, but he's been in a car. He's been in West Cork and Limerick, and he's somewhere between Galway and Tuam, I think, at the moment. And he's been meeting groups that have been doing creative practice around broadly arts and health for the last 30 years, the kind of thing that's in the exhibition upstairs. And so he will arrive back later tonight, and we will ask him all about what it's like, because a lot of this work is nearly invisible, or it's visible to a local community or a specific group of people. And then on Friday, he comes to you.
Yeah. To perform the Vanishing Point, which is a monologue. That'll be a part of our Disrupt Disability Arts Festival program. Again, it's on tomorrow night. Suzanne's performance is on at 6. It's currently booked out, but the exhibition runs at Project Art Centre all evening. Free alcohol, so come on over. And the performance will be online, so you can get a booking link from the Project Art Centre website. We have a 3 days of a program. We're talking about gender and disability on Friday, in line with International Women's Day. And then on Saturday, we're talking about disability and the body, and its the relationship between performing art and the body. We have workshops on neurodiversity and climate change, trans experience and climate change in the exhibition. It's a full program. This is our first time ever doing a festival. I don't know how to. I hope that I have. It's weird saying I'm a festival maker because I haven't made a festival yet. But ask me in 3 days' time, and then maybe I can finally own the title I've been giving myself.
We are
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, we're delighted you're doing it. We're delighted that you're making this work. We are so delighted that you made time this week to come and talk to us here. Thank you hugely from Creative Brain Week, and we look forward to supporting you and coming and seeing the work. Thank you.